Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Palisol. I am the General Manager of the UK here at Politico. Welcome to the pub. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to hand over very briefly to Andrew Brem from Uber. Thank you so much for partnering with us. Over to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. Especially good afternoon to Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander. Thank you for coming along. Welcome to the pub. I hope you enjoy the stifling atmosphere. Everyone will feel very at home in that situation. Transport must be the best portfolio to have. I mean, obviously, transport is at the centre of work, at the centre of life, at the centre of connectivity, and it is the centre of what we do, of course. I think Uber is the largest global platform for connectivity, for mobility. Just here in the UK, we've been here well over 10 years. We've got every week well over 100,000 drivers driving people around, millions of customers. And what not everyone realises is that it is quite important for connectivity. People don't tend actually to use an Uber to go from door to door, but actually from door to transport hubs. So 8 of our top 10 destinations are actually railway stations. The other 2 are airports. I think Liverpool Lime Street will be probably in the top 10, maybe in the top 1 in the first 3 days of this week. And we are very much everywhere. You know, well over half of our business is not in London, very much a national thing. We're licensing well over 100 licensing authorities now. So it's exciting times. And I have to say, you and your department have done an excellent job bringing the future forward with the acceleration of the AV program, and we're looking forward to having the first autonomous vehicles on the streets next year. And we partner with a British success story on that wave, who really are leaders in AI and AV globally. So that is exciting for our country, I think. So look, without further ado, I will hand over to you and your interviewer, and thank you for coming along.
Well, welcome along, Heidi.
Thank you, Charlie.
What do you think of our pub?
That's pretty cool, isn't it, to be honest? Probably the coolest venue in Liverpool at the moment in terms of the conference area. See what I'm doing there? Pleasing the Politico
Very
crowd.
Nice. And we serve real beer, which is excellent.
I've got shandy.
Well, still counts. We're speaking shortly after the Prime Minister has completed his speech. Yeah. I suppose I should ask off the top. What did you make of it?
Well, I think I think the boy done good, to be honest, is what I would say. I think people will leave conference knowing exactly what Keir Starmer stands for. The brother, you know, the stories that he was telling about his brother and his sister being a care worker, and, you know, the fact that he, I think, started to draw a really clear dividing line between the patriotism that he believes in and what he believes it is to be British, and that which is promoted by Farage and Reform. And, you know, I think that section of his speech where he talked about, you know, it's not patriotic to have a Union Jack on the side of a Chinese takeaway with the words "go home" on it. There's nothing patriotic about that. That's plain racism. I think that was really powerful, and I think that is where the mainstream majority of the British people are, to be honest. And so, you know, I thought it was a really good speech. I thought it went down well in the hall, and I think it was a really, you know, a good moment in what has been a good conference for the Labour Party.
But is this it now in terms of how the government communicates with the country? It's constantly responding to Nigel Farage, responding to Reform. They're setting the agenda, you're having to respond, but that means that they're sort of setting the political weather. I mean, I don't feel like it was a speech that changed that dynamic.
Look, I think the Conservatives have left the pitch, haven't they, since the general election? They're pretty much non-existent. When I go out knocking on doors in Swindon, the occasions on which the words Conservative come up are very, very few and far between. The word reform comes up a bit more now than it did before the general election. And, you know, in my general election, when I was elected to represent my hometown for the first time, having been an MP in another part of the country before, you know, look, I got 21,000 votes, the Conservative got 12,000, Reform got 6,000 at that point in time. And I think if more people are flirting with the idea of voting reform at the next election, it's really important that the Labour Party reminds people to read the small print about that party, because this is a party that is saying that it will deport people who have indefinite leave to remain. And let's translate that into plain English. It's the people who have been living here for decades, that might have been working in the NHS, might have been running businesses, might be married to British citizens, might have children in our schools, might be people that we live next door to. And, you know, for Zia Youssef to stand up a couple of weeks ago and say we're going to rescind indefinite leave to remain, that's pretty xenophobic in my book. And so, yeah, we've got to remind people about what that party actually is. But, you know, you get to the NHS, they want people to whip their credit card out. When you get to A&E, they want doctors to be checking people's bank balance before they're, you know, checking your pulse. But I don't think people, you know, have really got their head around exactly what this party is and what it stands for. It's a party full of cranks and conspiracists, and we need to set that out for the British people in some pretty plain language. And I think, you know, in politics there's always going to be setting your stall out about the positive vision that you've got for the country, but you've also got to ensure that people understand what the opposition are all about as well.
The Prime Minister's called reforms policies racist. Do you think Nigel Farage himself is a racist?
So I don't think that either Nigel Farage or the Reform Party has the same values as the majority of the British people, because I think the mainstream majority in this country are tolerant, they are decent, they are respectful, and they believe in fair play. And, you know, what we were just talking about a minute ago with those immigration policies about indefinite leave to remain, I don't see how that is consistent with fair play.
I said you're not setting the political weather, but in fairness, you are nationalising the railways as we speak.
It's good.
When are we going to see the Great British Railways bill, the bill that's going to bring all of those operators under public control? It was already started, but that's the one that's going to set up a whole new organisation to run it.
Yeah, so look, when I came into this job at the end of November last year, I inherited some really good work that was done by my predecessor, Lou Haig. She'd already got the public ownership bill through Parliament, and that was the legislation that paved the way to bring the train operating companies into public ownership by default, if you like, at the point at which the contracts that they have with the DfT expire. Previously, the Conservative government had seen public ownership as a last resort. And actually what that legislation did was say, no, this is the default, and this is a positive opportunity to build a railway that's fit for the 21st century, because we know that prior to the general election, we'd had 2 years of strikes. We lost £850 million in lost fare revenue during that time, and people started to think, actually, why would I book a train ticket if I'm not sure whether the train is going to be running on that day or that weekend? So, look, the first train operating company that we brought into public ownership was South Western on the 25th of May this year, a really big train operating company. C2C in Essex came in July, Greater Anglia on the 12th of October, and then next year 4 train operating companies are coming in.
When is Great British Railways, the sort of the big state controller, going to be up and running?
Yeah, I was just explaining to people really what the process is, because it is complicated. So we've got another 4 train operating companies coming in next year: West Midland Trains, Thameslink, Chiltern, Great Western. I will be introducing to Parliament the Railways Bill. The Railways Bill gives me the power as the Secretary of State to set up Great British Railways as a new public sector organisation. That will bring together Network Rail, which maintains, operates, owns the infrastructure at the moment, the tracks and the signalling, and also all of the train operating companies that over the next 2 years we're going to be bringing into public ownership, because once we've done the 4 next year, there's another 3 to do in 2027. So if I introduce the legislation to take the powers to set Great British Railways up, you know, realistically, to get a bill through Parliament, 8 or 9 months, it gets royal assent. I've been clear with officials in my department that Great British Railways is going to be set up in 2027.
Right. And are you...
Sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
It's perfectly all right. Perfectly all right. We're in the pub. We're relaxed. You've said that nationalisation will mean reliable, comfortable and more affordable journeys for all. Can you guarantee it's going to mean cheaper train tickets?
So I can't guarantee in the first year of Great British Railways being set up that I'm going to be able to lower train fares. The truth of the matter is that at the moment we spend over £10 billion a year on the infrastructure, Network Rail, and we also subsidise the day-to-day running of the train operating companies to the tune of £2 billion every year, and that subsidy has gone up post-COVID. And so I have to take decisions around fares that are fair to the fare payer, but also fair to the taxpayer. And any money that we are using to subsidise the railways, that's money that can't be spent to increase the number of NHS dentists in my town. That's money that can't be spent on improving the education that the kids that the Prime Minister was talking about in further education colleges are.
So I've got to come down over time.
So look, that's where I would like to get to, but I'm not going to make promises that I can't keep. We've had our fill, frankly, of politicians that say that they're going to do things and can't deliver on that. We do need to simplify the fare structure, so some tickets will be cheaper, but we've got millions of different fare types. It's totally baffling to people, how to navigate which fare to buy in order to get the cheapest journey. Some of the work that we're doing to extend pay-as-you-go, like the setup that you've got in London, where you can tap in and tap out with your bank card or your phone, and that that when you're making that journey, you are going to get the lowest cost fare available on that day. Now, we're doing some work in places like Greater Manchester, Liverpool, in Birmingham, to try and get to that sort of integrated pay-as-you-go type model. So we do need to simplify, but what I can't promise people is that I'm going to be able to bring fares down because of the commercial reality of running the railway at the moment. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
What I can do in order to bring the subsidy down is get more bums on seats. If I've got more bums on seats on the trains, I'm not paying to move empty bits of steel around the tracks. I'm actually increasing the fare revenue that I'm getting in. So the big win for me is make the railways more popular. We do things like the rail sale, which are terrifically popular with the travelling public because
there are a lot of bums on seats on the trains up to Liverpool. I have to say, it was a standing room only for me.
Well, I apologise for that.
All right, it's not your problem, although it sort of kind of is, I suppose.
I think everyone's. I've learnt this as Transport Secretary. You can't go anywhere without somebody telling you exactly what their journey was like in getting to the venue, whether it's the roads or the trains. So I was going up to the Hitachi plant in Newton Aycliffe in County Durham on Friday night to give a speech about the 200th anniversary of the first passenger railway service. And I literally got stuck behind wild horses on the road because I wasn't taking the train. That was the first error. But I was able to say to the attendees at this dinner that wild horses couldn't keep me away because I did actually get there. So
I want to come back to the Prime Minister's speech, because one part of it that did really surprise me was to hear him mentioning Brexit. Mm-hmm. He talked about the lies on the side of the Brexit bus at the point where he was attacking Farage and reform. You were a passionate Remainer and argued strongly for staying in a single market in those days. I know we're rolling the clock back a bit. But if the Prime Minister thinks that Brexit was predicated on lies, which is pretty much what he said in that speech, does that mean Labour is now comfortable saying Brexit was a bad idea?
Oh, look, Charlie, we've had that debate, haven't
we? Have,
and look, we're not going back there because the division that it caused in our communities, the division, frankly, it caused in some families.
So why is the Prime Minister bringing it up in his conference speech?
I think what he's actually pointing out is that Nigel Farage marched everyone to the top of the hill with this. It was lies about the £350 million that was going to be available every week to be spending on the NHS. It was a total load of crap, to be honest. And, the people that were selling the false prospectus to the British public, which, we've got to make work now because of where we are, but they are the same snake oil salesmen that the Prime Minister is talking about in his speech. who are claiming to be the true patriotic Brits in our country when the reverse is true.
That's not sort of against Farage's sort of passionate arguments about why we're out of the EU. That's not very inspiring for a voter. Like, can I read you something you wrote in 2018?
Yeah, but just, Charlie, let me just say this. Let me just say this to you, to be honest. Rachel stood up and made a brilliant speech yesterday, and she said, we've got to deal with the world as we find it, not the world as we might want it to be. And, look, we have worked really hard to reset our relationship with other European countries. And, I think people like Nick Thomas-Symonds that led on that work should really be given our thanks, because I think that was so important. And, all the things that we're going to do about renegotiating, the new SPS agreement, phytosanitary agreement, which is all about, the way in which food, agricultural products are exported and imported to our country. That's going to make a massive difference. Like in my constituency, I visited an old airfield at the basically where Tesco's have been having to store all of their pallets, because the pallets that food comes in on lorries from the EU has to be basically like checked and cleaned and whatever. These things go on for like miles on this airfield. And whatever way people voted, whether it was to leave or remain in the European Union, they did not vote for that bureaucratic madness, to be honest.
You argued in 2018 that future generations will not forgive us for the damage that Brexit will do to our economy. I mean, we're living in that economy now. The Prime Minister also said that economic growth is everything to this government.
And exactly,
is there more we can do to get closer to the EU?
Everything I've just said, Charlie, shows you what this government is doing in a really sensible, pragmatic way to tackle some of these bureaucratic problems that have arisen as a result of us leaving the European Union. I think it's really exciting that Rachel has stood up and said we want an ambitious youth experience scheme. We want to be ambitious when it comes to youth mobility. Look, I'm someone
but no push towards a customs union or a single market anytime. I mean, Andy Burnham said he wants to get back into the EU in his lifetime. Do you want to see that?
Well, look, I think what we've got to do is offer greater opportunities for both the businesses that are located here in the UK to trade with the European Union, bring us closer in that way. I think we should offer greater opportunities for our young people to go and live in EU countries and get an experience. I benefited from that when I was 21 years old, lived in Austria for a year. I don't benefit from the bank of mum and dad to be able to do those things. I never did. But that gave me experiences which changed my life. And I want people that are growing up in my constituency today to have similar opportunities to that. Now, I don't think that you have to commit to going back into the European Union in order to give businesses, individuals, young people, the next generation, sort of opportunities that they can enjoy and that they can thrive and prosper as a result of. And so I think we've got to be pragmatic about this. We have reset relationships with the European Union, and for me, that's a really, really positive thing.
Quick fire round before we go to a few audience questions.
I thought this was going to be on transport, by the way. This is totally different from what my special advisor said that we were going to be. I was going to be talking about.
We had a fairly long segment on transport, I think it's fair to say. Bus or train?
Yeah.
Oh, quick fire question.
Oh, the 321 bus from down Lehigh Road into Lewisham when I'm living in London. The train from Swindon to Paddington.
Very nice. Mind the gap or see it, say it sorted?
Oh, mind the gap. It's totemic, isn't it, about everything to do with the transport system.
Is it possible to get see it, say it sorted eradicated?
Look, I think the fact that we are all laughing and joking about this means that it is lodged all right. in our consciousness.
I think I know the answer to this one. Swindon or Lewisham?
Oh, Swindon.
And, next leader, Sadiq Khan or Andy Burnham?
Oh, there's no vacancy.
Easy answer. Do we have any questions from the audience before we close? I can see one over at the bar and one here at the front, which we'll go to the front and then out at the bar.
Hi Heidi. I just wanted to talk about EVs and where you guys are with your EV strategy. I recently bought one without my own charger, but I had to buy a car with a really long range to ensure that I can do it. And when are you going to get an EV?
Yeah. Well, my car is not an EV at the moment, and I've been totally open about that. And I think I'm like quite a lot of the British people who, when we next buy a car, we will buy one. The last time we bought a car, my husband and I were a one-car household, was in 2019. If it was up to me, I'd run cars absolutely into the ground. My husband is not of that view, so we'll have a chat about when we're actually going to buy an EV. I live in a terrace house, and so, you know, I've got some of the similar considerations that other people have. I can probably park outside my house like one time in 4, to be honest. But I do think that the rate at which we are expanding the charging network, some of these cross-pavement solutions as well, you can get these little gullies that actually sit inside the pavement and enable you to get the cable out to the car. They're pretty fascinating. We're putting some money into local councils to get to the point where people can apply for a pavement gully in the same way as you might apply for a drop curb if you were wanting to, you know, get your car onto a driveway. We have launched something called the Electric Car Grant, which is a £650 million scheme to offer money off of certain models of electric vehicles. So there are 36 cars out there at the moment which qualify for either a £1,500 reduction or a £3,750 reduction. And the reason why those models qualify and not all EVs qualify is that we've done something quite clever, I think, even if I say so myself, in looking at the overall sustainability of the way in which the car is produced. So, you know, how carbon intensive is the manufacturing and assembly process for those cars. And so it's gone really well in the first couple of weeks. We launched that earlier in the summer. We've seen some really good signs in terms of how many EVs are being sold. So I think in the last month that I saw data for, it was about 28% of new cars that were sold are EVs. But actually what we do also have to remember is that people like me generally keep a car for quite a long time. And so the rate at which the churn is happening, it's still going to take quite a long time to transition the entire fleet, because at the moment it's about 4 or 5% of cars out on the roads that are EVs. We've reinstated the 2030 phase-out date, which was one of the massive mistakes that Rishi Sunak made, because, you know, there was all of this dithering around, not knowing what was going on. So we've said after 2030 you won't be able to buy a car that's powered solely by diesel or petrol. You can still buy hybrids through until 2035, things like the Toyota Prius. So look, I think this whole transition to electric vehicles is undoubtedly the right thing to be doing. It supports really good quality jobs in the UK as well. And I think it's the right thing to do for a whole variety of reasons.
Where do we stand on Chinese cars? 1 in 10 cars bought in the UK in June were Chinese. Are we kind of up for that, the kind of the big influx of Chinese cars into our market? Or, I mean, the EU is putting tariffs on, or do we have concerns that might eat into our own industry?
Yeah, so look, I think obviously some of the Chinese cars are more affordable, and what we've actually seen, because some of those Chinese models don't qualify for the electric car grant because of the sustainability credentials of their production that I was just talking about. But what they're actually doing is, some of them are actually, I think, reducing some of their prices further still. So in my mind, you know, need to think about affordability to people that are wanting to buy a car, but equally we're also trying to drive high sustainability standards in the way that vehicles are produced. And I also want to ensure that we are protecting, you know, the industrial footprint of car manufacturing in the UK is really important. But we've seen that, haven't we, this summer with Jaguar Land Rover. We had the Luton plant of Stellantis closed down, and they focused their production in Ellesmere Port. I represent a town where Honda closed their doors, and, you know, arguably might have been to do with Brexit. And, you know, that whole site is levelled, and actually there's new investment going in there now at the moment. But I think there's a lot of people's jobs and livelihoods depend upon the the car assembly and the wider supply chain process in the UK. And so we've got to think about all of those different considerations in how we approach this issue. But, you know, I can't turn on Magic Radio without hearing an advert for BYD. JQ have got a massive showroom at the Mannington Roundabout in Swindon.
There's an advisor to reform that's had a pretty wacky quote at their conference that said your government wants us all in electric cars. Electric cars can be remotely controlled. That's not a conspiracy theory. These cars can be shut down. What do you make of that? Should we be concerned about that?
Well,
Can Xi Jinping listen into our conversations when we're in our electric cars?
Well, my Mini has got a lot of remote technology involved in it, and when you go and visit, you know, when you go and talk to Holfords, to mechanics there, they talk to you actually about how so much of the cars nowadays that are being produced is actually software. So you've got software in cars that aren't EVs. You will have software in cars that are EVs, and I just think this is just nuts, isn't it? It's just
rubbish,
like
the Chinese security threat for electric cars.
Well, look, I think there's nothing that we're not going to do anything to compromise national security. But I do think this quote that you're throwing at me basically is symptomatic of the cranks and conspiracists that are in the Reform Party.
Time for one more question from the floor? Just one more question from the floor, I think. Chap over there at the bar. Two questions is fine as well.
Two questions.
Just one from one person.
Heidi, I know you're not the Department for Trains, but rail fares. When are we getting the announcement on the fares? And secondly, there's been a lot of support for buses, commuters. You know, is there going to be help for trains? Is there a way of freezing fares? You know, if my train up here on a Saturday evening was £85. You talk about the Great British Rail sale. If I booked it 4 months ago, it may have been cheaper, but it was £85 off on normal days, £200 peak to come up to Liverpool. Is there going to be help? That will get bums on seats if you can stop the fares going up. It's, £30 to get into London on an 18-minute journey is insane amounts of money compared to other European countries. And then, how are you going to deal with the unions? I was at an event with ASLEF and RMT. ASLEF are a reasonable union, RMT complete headbangers. Are you going to, that's why the fares are so high, because the salaries are so high.
You did say everyone tells you about their journey.
Yeah, indeed. I
what's
didn't
the
realise I
answer?
was doing an interview with the Times this evening either. Look, I haven't taken a decision yet on what rail fares are going to be next year. I am mindful of cost of living pressures, and I am mindful of what the July rate of inflation was. I would love to be able to tell the travelling public that I could freeze or reduce their fares. I don't think that is realistic at the moment because I have to ensure that the railways are financially sustainable. We have put in place the £3 bus fare cap. Rachel announced that at the spending review. We all know that people who rely upon the buses are sometimes people who have got lower incomes, and I'm really proud that the Labour government has committed to that. And Ben, I think we've spoken before, haven't we, about my approach to industrial relations. Look, I'd served for 4 years as a Deputy Mayor for Transport in London. Sometimes the unions are going to be right and they're going to have a fair point. Sometimes they're going to be wrong. Sometimes you've got to take industrial action. And whilst I'm really pleased of my record and this government's record since the election that we haven't had a national rail strike, we've had 1 or 2 small strikes on train operating companies like Avanti West Coast or Cross Country. Actually, we've got to get back to a place where people know that the trains are going to be running. And as a result of that, I need to have a mature, grown-up relationship with the trade unions. That is what I have sought to foster over the last few months being in this job. It's certainly what I sought to foster when I was Deputy Mayor for Transport in London. And I think we need to see the trade union movement not as problems to be managed, but as partners to be worked with. And in my life, I want to be treated I want to treat people the way I'd like to be treated myself. And if we can foster that spirit of respect, we all want a better railway. We all want more people using the railways. That's good for the union members, and it's good for me operating the railways as well.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much. One more question over here. One more question over here.
Sorry, I'll make it quick. I'm a colleague of Charlie's, so claiming some privileges. But I covered tech policy, and I just wanted to ask about two related areas where tech and transport policy converge. On micro-mobility, I live in Waltham Forest Council. It has different rules to Hackney Council. So bikes or scooters get piled up at the border, and you can't ride a lime into Waltham Forest. Will we see some kind of consistency at the national level there that would, I guess, assume really help kind of startups working in that space? And relatedly, the UK has a few promising startups in autonomous vehicles. Oxa and Wave kind of come to mind. But other countries have kind of stolen a march on allowing testing and trials on the street. So could you provide an update on that?
Yeah, so we have said that we're going to advance the trials for autonomous taxi-like and bus-like services to get to a point where they can be happening in spring of next year. We need to take some secondary legislation through in order to facilitate those trials in the spring. I went in a Wave car in North London, just north of King's Cross, a couple of months ago, and I've got to say the technology is absolutely mind-blowing. So the first time I went in a driverless car was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and the technology has moved on by leaps and bounds. And if you didn't know that you were in a driverless car, the only thing that would tell you that you were is the fact that it is slightly, ever so slightly more cautious, in my view, than your average driver. So I sat in this car in really, really busy streets in London. There was a cyclist, there were roadworks, there was a bus coming the other way, and I was observing what was going on, and I thought, if I was driving this car, or if my husband was driving this car, or I was in, a traditional Uber, I think in all of those scenarios we would have sought to get past the cyclist, and the driverless car just sat behind the cyclist, which definitely made for a more civilised road environment, I would say. And look, a lot of people have said to me, when it comes to, autonomous vehicles, they don't drink drive. They're not trying to resolve an argument with two toddlers sat fighting over sweets in the back seat. They don't get road rage. And so, look, I want to make sure that we embrace new technology. We do so in a way which is safe, and we do so in a way which can bring the public with us. So that's the answer on autonomous vehicles. On micromobility, we do need to set up a proper regulatory framework across the entire country. And at the moment, the responsibilities in different cities are very different. And in London, even the responsibilities between Transport for London and the different local authorities is really complicated. And so you've got some examples of really good best practice. So one of the things that people always talk to me about is, whether it's scooters or e-bikes that are strewn all over the pavement and are actually, a real problem for people who are walking, if you've got a pushchair, if you've got mobility impairments. And actually, if you look at like Westminster Council, they've got a really strict geofencing model in place where you cannot park the Lime bike or whatever the bike is anywhere other than in the designated parking bay. So I often Lime bike it in from Lewisham in the morning. It's actually probably the quickest way to get into the Department for Transport from where I live in Lewisham, and it also means I'm not on my phone for 45 minutes, which is a really good thing. And I can't park the Lime bike directly in front of the Department for Transport because it's a restricted area. I take it 200 metres down the road and I can park it there. And I think we're going to have to work through all of these different issues so that, again, we build some public consensus that these forms of micromobility are actually a good thing, a good addition. They can help ease congestion. They can be a relatively low cost, affordable way for people to get around, but we've got to make it work for everyone.
Heidi, thank you so much for your time. Safe journey home.
Thank you.
Heidi Alexander, Secretary of State for
Thank
Transport,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Charlie.